The winter wind clawed across the high plains like a living thing, rattling the brittle grass and howling through the half-collapsed fencing of Eli, Carter's ranch, a poor man's spread of dry land and stubborn hope where the horizon seemed endless and mercy was scarce, and Eli himself moved through it with the quiet endurance of someone long accustomed to hunger, loss, and silence, his boots worn thin, his coat patched too many times to count, yet his spine still straight, because pride was the only thing poverty had not yet stolen from him. And it was on one such bitter afternoon, when the sun hung low and pale like a coin rubbed smooth by too many hands, that he first saw her standing near the creek bed, a figure so large and still that for a heartbeat he thought she was a weathered boulder, until she shifted, and the world seemed to hold its breath as the giant Apache woman turned toward him. Her height and breadth unmistakable even at a distance, shoulders squared like carved stone, dark hair braided thick down her back, her eyes carrying the kind of watchful intensity born from a lifetime of being both feared and desired, for the wrong reasons, and beside her, half hidden in the tall grass, stood her younger sister, smaller, trembling, eyes darting like a trapped deer, and Eli knew before a word was spoken that trouble had found him, because trouble always did when the strong preyed on the weak, and someone like him happened to be close enough to see it. The giant sister's name was Nita, and she had been promised, sold, really, to a brutal trader who coveted her strength and her land claim, a man whose wealth came from other people's suffering. And the wedding was to happen within days, forced by threats and debt and the ugly machinery of power that ground us here, down anyone without protection. And Nita had fled not for herself but for her sister, because the man had made it clear that resistance would cost the younger girl everything. And now the two of them stood on Eli's land, shivering in the cold and in the knowledge that once found, there would be no running left to do, and Eli, who had little more than a roof that leaked and a herd that barely fed him, felt something ignite in his chest that no winter wind could extinguish, a refusal to look away, a stubborn defiance against a world that told men like him to keep their heads down and survive quietly. And when Nita spoke, her voice was low and steady, carrying the weight of someone who had been called a giant. A beast, a prize, but rarely a woman with a choice. She told him the truth without ornament, that men were coming, that a forced marriage awaited her, that her sister would pay the price if she resisted. And Eli listened, really listened, the way people rarely did. And in that listening, a reckless idea took shape, dangerous and absurd, and yet the only weapon he had. And when he spoke, it felt like stepping off a cliff, because he offered himself not as a hero with money or guns or influence, but as a husband on paper only. A fake marriage, a lie bold enough to stall the truth, because a married woman could not be claimed, because even the cruelest men hesitated when faced with legal bonds and public scrutiny, and because sometimes survival depended not on strength but on buying time. And Nita studied him then, her dark eyes searching his face for deception, for lust, for fear, and finding instead a man who owned nothing but his word and was willing to wager even that. And she laughed once, a short sound edged with disbelief, because the idea that this poor rancher, with his sagging barn and empty cupboards, would stand between her and a forced life was almost too strange to trust. Yet desperation has a way of sharpening faith, and as the first riders appeared on the ridge like dark scars against the sky, Nita nodded, accepting the gamble. And Eli felt the weight of what he had done settle onto his shoulders heavier than any debt, because lies had consequences and this one would be tested. And when the men arrived, led by the trader whose smile never reached his eyes, Eli stood his ground, introduced Nita as his wife with a voice that did not waver, and dared the world to contradict him. And in that moment the story stopped being about a poor rancher and a giant Apache woman and became something larger, something dangerous, something that would demand sacrifice from them both. And as the trader's gaze flicked between them, calculating, the wind rose again, carrying with it the unspoken promise that this was only the beginning, and that if you want to know how a lie born of compassion can challenge power, break chains, and change lives forever, you need to stay with this story to the end, because what follows will test loyalty, ignite forbidden courage, and prove that sometimes the bravest marriages are the ones never meant to be real. So if you feel your heart pulling you deeper into this tale of survival, honor, and impossible choices, make sure you subscribe and stay, because the next chapter will take you where fear, love, and truth collide in ways no one can escape.